Hey everybody. So I'm sure you guys have been seeing what's going on lately with Johnny Depp, and I'm not gonna really talk about the case or anything, but I mean, come on, it's really weird and entertaining to see this unfold, but we always gotta think what's going on in the background with these types of events. This got me looking into Johnny's past work, and I watched this video that lays out all the roles that he's been in. I'll leave it in the description, but it was really crazy to see how many characters he's played throughout the years. Even movies like Tusk that I had no idea that he was even in. Today, I wanted to talk about a story that we all know and love, and that's Willy Wonka and his very strange chocolate factory. What if this movie isn't so funny and sweet after all, and this famous worldwide story was pushed because there is a dark, twisted secret behind the entire experience? I'm gonna approach this subject differently using alternative history and the occult to help decipher the alternative meaning and what's going on behind these stories. Before we break that down, let's go back to Johnny Depp, or Johnny Depped. Does he owe a specific debt to someone? Ninth Gate? If one were to study his work, they would completely see why Tim Burton knew that Johnny would be the best role for this film. Heck, even the writer Roald Dahl's wife thought Johnny was the perfect actor for Wonka. Tim Burton is deeply connected with all of this, and we have to look at his movies that he made and the ones with Depp in order to understand the bigger picture at what these Hollywood fat cats are trying to tell you. We really grew up thinking that this story is just about some golden tickets and these kids touring some amazing and bizarre chocolate factory. Many of Tim Burton's films are obsessive over death, and all of his films have a similar macabre style. It's understandable that these topics would be explored within creative entertainment, but at some point, if we start to categorize this stuff, we can see that there are many similar themes and there's a bigger picture among these movies. Beetlejuice is a story about an evil demon that possesses a home, and they never really say this as it's supposed to be a light-hearted horror comedy involving a recently deceased couple, implying that they're a ghost, yet in the early drafts, it's revealed that Beetlejuice was supposed to be a winged demon. How do you think he got all his powers? If this is true, then could it be that this is some type of occult play in which the normalization of occult forces was being projected on the masses, leading to subconscious demonic possession in homes around the world? Too much, right? Well, I don't know. Let's see what you think by the end of this video. It's obvious to anyone that's seen Burton's work that he has a strong relationship with the occult. For example, think about the movie 9 and its relationship to alchemy, homunculi, artificial man, Kabbalah, all of which are outside the scope of this video. Now, just because something contains occult topics doesn't inherently make it evil, but we have to remember that many of these famous Hollywood producers use magic within their films for specific mental subconscious programming, whether that is to embed their own viewpoint of the world on the film or to use symbols in order to harness energy that then in turn gives these movies power. I mean bro, what kind of film is Edward Scissorhands? It's a story about an artificial human who was made in a Tartarian looking castle factory with all these weird machines and gadgets. Some weird metaphor for a man-made human that destroys everything it touches and has little to no understanding of the world in which he was brought in. A pitiful tale in which there are no real winners. This is very synchronistic for Depp's future films, as, let's keep in mind, he supposedly just got casted for Beetlejuice 2. If you want my opinion, I doubt Tim Burton is coming up with all this on his own. I mean, he may be the creative mind behind the vision of how they manifest, but in terms of the writing and the similarities between all these films, you start to really wonder if there's something else going on, some overarching narrative. For those who may think this is just a case of coincidence, explain how or why is it that his first film in 1979, while he was supposedly in school, was a short animated film called Stalk of the Celery Monster, which is again a childish and comical approach to talking about some pretty horrible content. This short story is about a scientist who is doing genetic experiments, has some woman strapped to a table. She screams for the scientist to stop, breaking his glasses, but the scientist holds onto her mouth as a big pig-like monster comes into the room, yells at the girl, scaring her into silence. Then the scientist says, "Are we ready to begin?" as he starts injecting the patient, then, laughing maniacally, says, "I've done it." Then come to find out that this guy is Dr. Maxwell Payne, a family dentist, and he's doing this to unsuspecting victims behind the front of dental health. Basically a hijack. A dentist? This wouldn't be connected to anything else, would it? To me, something else is up with Tim Burton. He most likely was groomed and sent to school, and then because of his dark interest, was picked up by Hollywood elites. I mean, this is really weird for his first short film. What's the meaning? He was 20 and making stories about torturing other humans secretly? Perhaps. But let's continue with Depp, as we can't look at all of Tim Burton's films, but we must keep that in mind. Johnny's first major film was A Nightmare on Elm Street, which is about a supernatural demon that murders people in their dreams. And what is the glove made of? Razors. This stuff is no accident. Quote, "In Celtic mythology, elm trees were associated with the underworld. They had a special affinity with elves who guarded the burial mounds, their dead, and the associated passage into the underworld." This video isn't really a Johnny Depp movie breakdown, but I just wanted to make some connections before we get to the chocolate factory. There's another theme of many Hollywood actors being pushed into inverted gender roles. As many of you know, almost a way to show how controlled these actors are and what they can push them to do. All of these films by Tim Burton and many Depp films promote secretly very satanic themes. And that's not to say that the occult is satanic, but the symbolism they are promoting is surrounding death, but most disturbingly, vampirism. Now let's just start there, because if it's true that Tim Burton is some type of dark occultist, then we need to start asking questions, because he uses many of the same actors, including his wife, which many say are connected with the Rothschilds suspiciously. I can only say so much, but much of this has to do with Hollywood's fascination with
What is this shit? Rough. Makes pure masculine seem like ginger beer, man. Adrenochrome. Trace the comb. I gotta get off. Yeah, I know. Where'd you get this? Never mind, it's episode. What kind of monster coming this time? Satanism freak. I think there's only one source for this. Adrenaline gland from a living human. I know. The guy didn't have any cash. Give from me human blood said it would take me higher than I ever did. Thought he was kidding. I told him I'd just as soon have an ounce of so pure adrenaline. Or maybe just a fresh adrenaline to chew on. I can already feel this. The first wave felt like a combination of mescaline and methylene. Maybe I should take a swim.
Now, can we really conclude that these actors are all Satanists? It's speculative, but if you start to watch all of Tim Burton's films, there's really no question that he's dead set on portraying exclusively disturbing scenarios, many of which are well loved for their whimsical and surreal nature. Even Alice in Wonderland, Follow the White Rabbit. These people speak in symbols. Look at the cover. White rabbit with a pink eye, the red roses, time is running out. Interestingly, you can see this bunny programming symbolism all over Hollywood. The white rabbit figure is the figure that leads us to visit otherwise inaccessible places or adventures. They are guides that shepherd us down the rabbit hole. To some, it's a symbol of curiosity and intrigue, but to others, it's a symbol of mind control. This symbol brings to mind the whole Hugh Hefner's CIA-backed MK Factory thing. Don't think that the CIA is connected to all of this? Well, check out Lookout Mountain Laboratory, which was originally a US Air Defense Department center, but was turned into a massive Hollywood studio. Supposedly, Lookout Mountain Laboratory was developing secret weapons during the Cold War. The existence of this facility wasn't acknowledged until the early 90s, even though it had preceded some 19,000 government propaganda films. Host to the likes of John Ford, Jimmy Stewart, Howard Hawks, Ronald Reagan, Bing Crosby, Walt Disney, and Marilyn Monroe. It's said that they were working there with top secret clearances on MK or undisclosed projects. Hollywood civilian studio staff from Warner Brothers, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and RKO also worked alongside its military staff as producers, cameramen, and directors. So, with all that said, we're probably going to see Willy Wonka with completely new eyes.
Now that I've laid out all the different coincidences, you can presume that something else is going on with this whole Willy Wonka movie. The film is based on Roald Dahl's book, but even in the original, there are some clues that hint that something else is going on behind the scenes. So let's break this down. First, we have to understand who Roald Dahl was, the stories he made, and some of the disturbing details behind the stories that are glossed over because of their childish and funny bits. However, we must look at these stories as adults with new eyes. Roald Dahl is one of the biggest children's storytellers of the 20th century. Let's also keep in mind that he served as a wing commander during World War II. He had already worked for the state and government in the past, and once we break down his writings, we can see that this was a means to send out propaganda during this time. He's the writer behind James and the Giant Peach, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Fantastic Mr. Fox, The Big Friendly Giant, The Witches, and Matilda. Before we go on to dissecting Willy Wonka, let's just briefly point out what's so weird about these stories, especially since they're supposed to be directed towards children. Believe it or not, James and the Giant Peach has been frequently banned for its drug and alcoholic references. Not only that, but James' parents get eaten by an escaped zoo rhinoceros, which is just grim. Fantastic Mr. Fox is about a clever anthropomorphized fox named Mr. Fox who steals food from farmers using underground tunnels. He invites all the animals to live underground while the farmers wait on the outside, waiting for Mr. Fox to show up. Big Friendly Giant makes it clear that Dahl was not afraid to go into subjects of cannibalism within his stories, as when Sophie is kidnapped and taken to Giant Country, she finds out that, you wouldn't believe it, kids are on the menu. Promised Neverland much?
He's guzzling up human beings every night. Human beings?
Quote, "We's having an interesting babblement about the taste of the human being. The human being is not a vegetable," one giant says. Even though the plot of the book involves ridding the world of people eating giants, the BFG frequently lands on banned lists for its depiction of cannibalism. It also shows that Dahl is aware of these fringe subjects such as giants, orphans, magic, ESP, and he even gets into genetic manipulation and hybrids. George's Marvelous Medicine gets into that, which bizarrely was another book that was banned because people literally started trying to make the recipes themselves. And listen to this is super weird. The Witches, which is another book by Roald Dahl, is a British children's dark fantasy novel about a secret society of child-hating witches who live in every country. The witches are ruled by the extremely vicious and powerful Grand High Witch, who arrives in England to organize her plan to turn all of the children in England into mice. This gets back into altars. These are all symbols. They literally are telling you, why would you write a story like this when there are actual historical societies that committed similar horrendous acts? The witches in this story specifically want to kill children, or control them, hence the symbol of mice. Interestingly, we have another reference of witches transforming humans into animals. This right here will make it so clear why I'm going over Roald Dahl's older works first before breaking down the Willy Wonka movie. So, in this story about witches, written by Roald Dahl, quote, "The Grand High Witch unveils her master plan. All of England's witches are to purchase sweet shops with counterfeited money printed by her from a magical money-making machine, and give away free sweets and chocolates laced with a drop of her latest creation, Formula 86 Delayed Action Mouse Maker, a magic potion which turns the consumer into a mouse at a specified time set by the potion maker. The intent is for the children's teachers and parents to unwittingly kill the transformed children, thus doing the witches' dirty work for them so that nobody will ever find the witches because they are unaware that it was their doing." End quote. Wait, what? This guy's the same person who wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? Magical money making machine? Well, wait, does this explain how Willy Wonka became rich and who he truly is associated with? But it gets better. To demonstrate the formula's effectiveness, the Grand High Witch brings in a child named Bruno Jenkins, a rich and often greedy boy lured to the convention hall with the promise of free chocolate. She reveals that she had tricked Bruno into eating a chocolate bar laced with the formula the day before and had set the alarm to go off during the meeting. The potion takes effect, transforming Bruno into a mouse before the assembled witches. So, this chocolate is the means in which they transformed kids, in which these witches were knowingly poisoning children through, that's right, candy.
Finally, the last well-known story I want to touch on is Matilda. It's a pretty good movie, but one thing that I wanted to bring up that I always thought was really strange is how the teacher had these crazy torture machines. Things that one would see in medieval stories, and overall just really weird and degrading punishments. Like this one kid who had to eat a cake that contained the blood and sweat of the lunch lady. Trunchbull, the large principal who hates children, is a horrifying, though comical, reflection of the compulsory school industry. The most damning theme in this movie, though, is the fact that Matilda's psychic abilities are built up from the massive emotional neglect and damage that she suffers at the hands of her parents and principal. It's very similar to the experiments done in asylums, isolation, verbal abuse, the list goes on. A real-life example would be the Montauk Project, the events of which inspired the show Stranger Things. The whole premise of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is that Willy Wonka, the eccentric owner of the greatest and biggest chocolate factory in the world, has randomly decided to open the doors of his factory so that 5 lucky children who found golden tickets can come and see.
First, let's notice that this factory in both movies, it's basically a giant Tartarian structure. In the 2005 one, it's way more surreal and resembles a power plant, but still, it's basically an entire city, factory with underground chambers and all. So, how did Willy Wonka get so rich? I mean, in the Witch's book, they do talk about a magical money printing machine, but they never explain that in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I mean, Wonka's dad was just a dentist. The story says he started in a small shop on Cherry Street. Then, after making the most amazing candy, he soon became a billionaire, and with all that money, he built a chocolate factory. Okay, see, I don't really buy all that because how do you become a billionaire and just discover the world's best candy with little to no prior experience with candy, as we see that young Willy Wonka was prohibited from sugary sweets? But forgetting all that, Charlie's grandpa worked for Willy Wonka, and so he tells Charlie that Willy Wonka closed down the factory because spies started to steal his recipes. Then he shuts down the factory for a while and no one hears from him for a long time. Charlie stares at the closed down factory and ponders upon its mysteries. Just a couple days later, we find that Willy Wonka is temporarily opening the factory just to give a tour to 5 children who will win this amazing prize, and all they have to do is find these golden tickets. The whole movie is presenting this as if it was just a random event, but this simply isn't true. In fact, the entire thing is staged. Sure, the reactions from most of the people involved are genuine, but it's all a contrived series of events. In order to understand this, we're going to look at both movies, as even though the first one strayed away from the original book, There are clues that show the directors were fully aware of what was happening. What are the chances that all the people who find these tickets would be children? Why would an adult find one? And the one that did was called a fake, but how did Willy Wonka know that it was a fake? Was it because everything about this golden ticket scheme was staged and planned by Mr. Wonka? Were these children tactically chosen based on their specific attributes? Think about it. Why is it that every room is specifically designed for each spoiled child? It would have taken months to build these rooms. Even if Ty Pennington and Team Ramsey worked together, these rooms are just too specific and complex to have been made in the time they won and were on TV to the time they toured the factory. The rooms are all designed specifically to test the child who ends up dying in these rooms. And I know, the movies say that the Oompa Loompas go to rescue these children afterwards, but I suspect that this detail was added to lighten the story up and make it more palatable for general audiences. In both films, once Augustus falls into the chocolate pool, Wonka's not concerned at all, and actually, he's more worried for his chocolate. Yet, in the 2005 film, we can see that this happened right after he talked about the vacuum tube, and conveniently, it just so happened to be there once he fell in. Also, one clue is left here after the Oompa Loompas finish their song. Notice how weird Wonka's being in this movie. You can see that there's obviously something wrong with him. He's like staring off as if he knows something's about to happen, but doesn't want to seem like he's expecting something. Mike, being the clever little devil who figured out the system, knew from the very beginning that something was very off with Mr. Wonka. After the Augustus song, Charlie asks, how did they know everything? Wonka cuts him off saying, oh, it's just improv, but Mr. Salt and Mike comment that it seems rehearsed. Wonka just acts like he hasn't heard them. When Charlie asks his grandfather if the Oompa Loompas were really joking, his grandpa says, of course that boy will be fine. But the look on his face and the worried gaze tells us that he doesn't believe what he said. Also, Charlie is the only child who asks about Augustus' well-being, showing us again that he is pure of heart. Another clue is that when they get on the boat, there are the perfect amount of seats instead of 2 empty seats, as if they knew this was going to happen, so he probably thought logically, why add more seats? This scene is also very iconic because it's basically a ritual. It's some kind of occult passage through death, hinting towards the journey that these kids are about to partake in. He starts yelling like a fanatic, reciting this really strange poem. This is what it says in the book. There's no earthly way of knowing which direction we're going. There's no knowing where we're rowing or which way the river's flowing. Is it raining? Is it snowing? Is it a hurricane blowing? Not a speck of light is showing, so the danger must be growing. Are the fires of hell a-glowing? Is the grisly reaper mowing? Yes, the danger must be growing, for the rowers keep on rowing, and they're certainly not showing any signs that they are slowing.
And of course, anyone who's seen the film knows how unsettling these scenes are, especially the original film. Gene Wilder staring through everyone on the boat, screaming his lines with wide eyes, colors dancing on his face, and a boatload of very uncomfortable and scared passengers. I mean, that'd be unsettling for anyone. So yeah, could it be that this entire scene is about facing the pits of hell, where the Reaper is about to grant them passage into the underworld? Or is it just another coincidence? And is it just a coincidence that Marilyn Manson was the one who covered the song in the new one? Now I'm going to continue to explain how this whole event was orchestrated, but before that, let me just make it clear that there's definitely something strange going on with the original children's book. The original draft of the book was far more violent, with children being burned to death from the inside out, then ground into powder while screaming in agony, cut to ribbons, crushed, etc., and only Violet and Charlie were the survivors. This is also connected to the film Seven. Remember that movie about the serial killer who killed 7 people Saw-style using the victim's own vices? Well, in the original draft of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, there were actually 7 children. And in the book, we have the same themes as the film Seven. Each child is taken out by way of their own bad habit. The difference here is that it's more of a choice, but since they're kids and obviously have no self-control, the blame is really on the parents. Wonka, having some sort of ill will towards bad parents, wants to make the parents suffer. Essentially, what we're seeing is the story of a crazed madman who set up intricate traps specifically for each parent and child to punish them in some weird, sick way, showing that he had spied on them and chosen them beforehand, and this was their just desserts. Sounds familiar? That's because Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is basically the kids' version of Saw. Does that sound insane? Well, what's a common theme in horror? Clowns. Clowns are closely associated with the fallen angels, aliens, the Elohim, the elves, the Watchers. And names aside, these are beings who watch over and punish humanity for their wrongdoings. In these movie scenarios, it seems purely for their entertainment. Jigsaw and Willy Wonka are both these Joker-like entities. The title of the movie is even called Saw. Like, I saw you do that. In Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the first edition book, the illustrations of him really resemble Johnny Depp's portrayal of the Mad Hatter, yet another clown character. Especially in the Tim Burton film, he's got that crazy red hair, the pale face, and in fact, in a lot of the movies that Johnny Depp is in, he is made to be more pale. His natural skin color is much more tan, yet he plays so many pallid characters.
I know that sounds like a lot, but hang with me. I've seen all the breakdowns on this movie, including other theorizers who seem to think that this is too far of a stretch. There's no way Willy Wonka can be turning kids into candy, right? Right? Well, check it out for yourself. There were several chapters that were removed from the book. One called Spotty Powder, which also has a deleted character named Miranda Piker. This is just insane, listen to this. Quote, Spotty Powder was first published as a short story in 1973. In 1998, it was included in the children's horror anthology Scary Stories That Will Make You Scream, edited by Peter Haining. The brief note before the story described the story as having been left out of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory due to an already brimming number of misbehaving children characters in the tale. In 2005, the Times reprinted Spotty Powder as a lost chapter, saying that it had been found in Dahl's desk, written backwards in mirror writing the same way that Leonardo da Vinci wrote in his journals. Spotty Powder looks and tastes just like sugar, but causes bright red pox-like spots to appear on faces and necks 5 seconds after ingestion, so children who eat Spotty Powder do not have to go to school. The spots fade on their own a few hours later. After learning the purpose of Spotty Powder, the humorless, or I guess the enemy in this situation, smug Miranda Piker and her equally humorless father, a schoolmaster, are enraged and disappear into the Spotty Powder room to sabotage the machine. Soon after entering, they are heard making what Miss Piker interprets as screams. Mr. Wonka assures her after making a brief joke where he claims that headmasters are one of the occasional ingredients, that is, only laughter. Exactly what happens to them is not revealed in the extract. In an even earlier draft, sometime after being renamed from Miranda Grope to Miranda Piker, but before Spotty Powder was written, she falls down the chocolate waterfall and ends up in the peanut brittle mixer. This results in the rude and disobedient little kid becoming quite delicious. This early draft poem was slightly rewritten as an Oompa Loompa song in the Lost Chapter, which now puts her in the Spotty Powder mixer, and instead of being crunchy and good, she is now useful for truancy and good. Roald Dahl here is making a cruel joke about the parents eating one of their own children and thinking how delicious it tastes. What kind of madman is Willy Wonka? Not only that, but he had a plan to purposely infect the population with some type of smallpox that seems to be some reaction to eating his secret ingredient. I've given you clear evidence, not just the ones in his books, but multiple different stories that show without question that the themes of cannibalism, child torture, and mental control have been underground ideas behind all these popular children's stories. I can understand having some sort of fear factor to make an interesting story, but come on, that chapter is just way too much, and how can you ever look at Charlie and the Chocolate Factory the same again knowing that that was actually going to be included in the story? Think about the video that came up before this and how we were discussing how most candy is actually made from gluten or pigs, and if we consider what we know now, the reason why Mr. Wonka shut down his factory is because he was putting substances into the candy that were causing people to become addicted, hence why he became so popular. People started to find out, and so he was forced to close down and operate in secret. Throughout the book, it references that this ingredient is actually people, or children. Now back to showing you that this was all an orchestrated plan by a maniac, Not only are all these rooms designed for trapping and killing these children if they do not pass their test, but these children were not randomly chosen at all. They were sought out and chosen by Willy Wonka on purpose. We know this because in the end, we learn of Mr. Slugworth, which in the 2005 movie, this clue was left out, but in the first movie, Mr. Slugworth is at every scene every time a child finds the golden ticket. But wait, how was he spying on them? They came from all over the world. Was Mr. Slugworth on and off airplanes all week? Was he going on the street and looking for troublesome children and parents to follow home and spy on? Was there maybe some sort of Wonka technology involved? He does look very Men in Blackish actually, now that I think about it. So, the basic premise of the story is that Willy Wonka was getting old and needed someone to take over his factory. Because he had no one to pass it on to, he had to search for the perfect child and was willing to do anything to teach this child a lesson. So, his employee, Mr. Slugworth, or at the end of the film, Mr. Wilkinson, was tasked with finding all these children.
The fact is, there was never any randomness involved. Mr. Wilkinson spied on these children and purposely planted the tickets for them to find. Same thing with Charlie. We're supposed to believe that he just randomly finds money on the ground. And then what are the chances that the boy who finds the last golden ticket is from the same city as the factory? Which, weirdly enough, this factory is bigger than the entire city. Willy Wonka must have somehow noticed Charlie looking at the factory and saw the innocence in him and wanted to put him through the ringer and maybe see if he was willing to partake in the candy making process. This is further proven as each room is designed for each child. The tube was just big enough for a human to fit through. And think about it, I mean, where are these tubes going? Augustus is most likely drowned or suffocated regardless, as he was in a high pressure tube and being squished. And as we enter each room, Mr. Wonka doesn't leave until the child falls for the trap that was designed for them. With Violet and the chewing gum, how could she resist a chewing gum that would never go bad? Wonka even admits in the 2005 version that he dislikes chewing gum. He finds it gross. He hates it the most. Not to mention that in real life, the Wonka brand today does not sell chewing gum. So why would he develop such a thing? How would he not know that this gum would turn her into a blueberry? It's a pretty drastic side effect. So basically, Willy Wonka has the power to turn children into fruits and other goodies by way of some sort of technology or alchemy. No one would even know how to cure such a thing. He says, "We gotta squeeze the juice out of her immediately. We will have to see how she comes out." Not sounding concerned in the slightest, and that's because he knew this was all going to happen. We even can see in some of the old illustrations that his workshop or his factory resembles old alchemical artworks. With Veruca, it's her desire to collect animals, like ponies, that ends up being her downfall. In each film, it's different, but both reference a pit for all her material desires. While in the nut room, Veruca sees a squirrel opening nuts, and as she goes to explore, Willy Wonka tells her not to, tells her to stop. Just one time though, because then he proceeds to just let her fall into the trap. He tries to find the right key as he's chuckling, again not taking this seriously at all. And with Mike, he's brought into a TV room. This microwave TV looking thing basically alters your DNA and clones your entire structure. In the 2005 film, it shrinks Mike down to action figure size. This is another proof that this entire thing was staged from the beginning, as what is he doing with this high-tech gear for making a TV show? Is this all some sort of sick game? In the first movie, Charlie's portrayed as not being perfect himself, and he was tested and almost failed. If they didn't figure out how to stop floating, they would have undoubtedly been killed. So where were the Oompa Loompas then?
Speaking of which, where did Willy Wonka get these Oompa Loompas? Remember when Mike's dad is like, "Oh, I'm a high school history teacher. There are no lands that I don't know of." In the book, the Oompa Loompas are unfortunately described as African pygmies, and as we know from the last video, in many old world African tribal cultures, long pig was on the menu. So, Willy Wonka is basically a Mad Hatter corporate hat that somehow got in charge of an old world factory with ancient advanced tech and used this factory to start creating the world's most addicting candy made out of, you guessed it, children. And sugar, of course. This 2005 movie is extremely dark because Tim Burton shows that he has a complete understanding of this, and he also gives Willy Wonka a past and a reason on why he wants to get revenge. He was bullied and never truly had parents. so he despises parents who let their children misbehave. You can interpret this as him being an orphan, as he did run away from home, but the story never explains how he became such a wealthy industrialist. How did he even get the funds to travel outside of the known world and bring back hundreds of little men? He also never mentions that the glass elevator could have been used the entire time. And when Charlie asked about it, Willy Wonka said, oh, that he just forgot. But how do you forget your primary mode of travel? We see later in the film that he uses this magical elevator to go to the outside world to crash land into his home. In the 2005 film, Wonka tries to take Charlie away from his family forever with promises of never-ending candy and is shocked when Charlie declines his offer. It's also very strange how vast this factory is. It's almost as if it's its own contained city or universe. Many of the visuals of the 2005 film seem to show an endless structure that begins to peer off into something else entirely, whether it be some virtual or metaphysical experience. I'm not really sure what to make of all that, but maybe it's alluding to some journey through the afterlife, and then after Charlie winning the contest, he gets to see things from a much higher vantage point. Was Charlie being programmed by Willy Wonka to continue his process of making candy or continuing this cycle of control? This was no ultimate prize. This was going to be his hell, as Wonka needed someone gullible and innocent enough to take over his factory. Think about what this movie is, and how this was a movie promoted to endorse the killing of children who were visiting a psychotic man who spied on and chose these kids strategically to partake in some weird experiment that in the original story led to their deaths. People worldwide watch this film over and over, billions of views. Think about what this does to the subconscious, especially when you don't know what the story's about. The producers know that 90% of the audience have not read the original source material or the removed and archived versions. Tim Burton must have known this. He has most likely read all of Roald Dahl's work, and if you don't think Tim Burton knows this, let me just give you a reminder of the most famous quote from the 2005 movie. Willy Wonka says, "Everything in this room is edible. Even I'm edible, but..." Wait, what? Why would you say that in a kid's movie? There's really no reason to include that, but if you consider everything I said and the fact that Tim Burton is involved with this as well, I mean, just think of Sweeney Todd. It's literally the same thing. A barber is killing people and they are turning them into meat pies, which, coincidentally, stars Johnny Depp. So this isn't a stretch. Tim Burton has covered these topics in many movies. And if you're still not convinced that Hollywood does indeed know about this, have you seen Epic Movie? It's basically telling you straight up what the story's about. And this is the same people who made Scary Movie, so it's supposed to be a comedy, but they aren't hiding anything. When the four main protagonists get the golden tickets, they go to the factory, and after Edward consumes the chocolate river, Willy Wonka reveals that the secret ingredient of his candy is actually human parts, and that he intends on using orphans in his next batch. The slapstick humor in the film shows different parts of the victim's body being brutally harvested and made into different kinds of candies. I shit you not, this is a real film, and is it really as comical now that you see everything else that's been going on behind the scenes? I don't really think so, as it's kind of weird that they're throwing this in your face, but that's just me. I'm not sure if you guys have heard that Snowpiercer is suspected to be a sequel to Willy Wonka, but there is a lot in common with the film, such as they're both groups of people walking through a large building or maze that they have to get to the end of. One by one, they're killed off. One person makes it to the end realizing that it was some weird experiment orchestrated by one person looking for a successor. This man, in this case named Wilford, very close to Willy, or founder of Wilford Industries, is actually Charlie after growing up. Which is weird, how did he get the name Wilford? This actor also plays Kristoff in The Truman Show, a very similar theme that connects here, which also connects back to Wonka TV and the whole thing being a show. And even at the end of the 2005 film, we even see Wonka bump into the camera. It seems accidental, but you can never tell with Willy Wonka. Another thing that I can't help but wonder is, how did Charlie invent all these things in the Snowpiercer film when he was never formally educated? There must have been some tech within the factory that he re-engineered, but how would Charlie know how to make a perpetual engine? Another clue that maybe Charlie was but to be used as a surrogate. Weirdly enough, there is a confession in the film where they admit they had to eat the other humans to survive. Also, in order to power this train after the engine had worn out, they had to steal children from around the age of 5, grabbing them from the tail and placing them within the train engine to function as the missing part. Charlie ends up becoming some weird post-apocalyptic utopian god. Could it be that Charlie isn't even Charlie anymore? Could Willy Wonka have taken over Charlie's body using some sort of Wonka technology, then created the perpetual engine to construct some type of strange world where he was God after changing his name and brand to Wilford Industries? There's no way Charlie would have been on board with killing children. Even if he was bullied or poor, he wasn't jaded about it. He shared everything that he had. That's why Wonka chose him. So I find it hard to believe that Charlie would become evil of his own volition. Could it be that this is not just a Truman Show situation, but a Being John Malkovich, Get Out, or Invasion of the Body Snatchers type scenario in which a hyper-intelligent being from who knows where takes over a town and builds a multi-billion-dollar candy industry, and with the power of advanced technology and free labor outsourced from lands outside of public knowledge, he's behind the scenes creating this world's best candy to slowly poison the populace, making them sick, addicted, and obsessed with him. Wonka is the god of this world. He is the demon, the Mad Hatter, the High Witch, whose true purpose is to control, torture, and manipulate children into being all a part of his puppet show, his mice. So what do you think? Is there something else going on with the Willy Wonka movies? Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you don't know, we just started a Spanish and German Mind Unveiled channel that is dedicated to translating and narrating all of our videos. If you're interested, go check that out as it will be much easier to understand if those are your native languages. With that, follow our socials, stay curious, and all we can hope is that our minds may be unveiled.
Let go of everything you think to be true. Relax the mind and ask the question, do I truly understand what this reality is?